jacket, and you mentioned that that's the family
Tartan, yes.
Explain it. Explain the family tartan. I don't know what that means.
A tartan, of course, that's a cloth that the Scots have in the Highlands. And each clan has its own weave and detail. It's just a terrific thing. They have to have them registered in some sort of an office, but this particular tartan is prescribed for the Ross clan. And of course my mother was a Ross. My grandfather on my mother's side was born in Glasgow before they came to Canada. And they came to Canada, Hamilton, Ontario, and that's where my mother was born, in Hamilton. Then they moved to Rochester, and then eventually to Jamestown.
So your mother's brother was Emmett Ross?
Yes.
Okay.
That was my mother's brother, and when my mother and father passed away, my uncle Emmett Ross and Anna, his wife, took my sister and brother and myself as sort of foster children. And they lived at 1111 Prendergast Avenue, right here.
This would be your mother. Was she born in Scotland?
No, she was born in Hamilton, Ontario.
So it'd be your
My grandfather was in Glasgow. Actually, Govan, G-O-V-A-N, which is, at that time, was a suburb of Glasgow. Now it's included in the metropolitan area of Glasgow itself. And then his parents came from County Tyrone in Ireland. That's in Northern Ireland. And when the Ross members of the clan separated from Scotland and went to Ireland, we can't go back that far because all the records in that part of Scotland, or in Ireland, were destroyed by fire, which is unfortunate because it would be nice to trace it back as to when they came to Ireland,
Sure.
North Ireland, which is part of Ulster.
So you're Irish and Scotch from your mother's side.
Yes.
And what about your father's side?
Well, that's English. Now, Ross Weeks Jr. has surveyed that. He's got quite a genealogy worked up, which is just interesting, but I don't have it all. But it was back in England sometime when they came over. But my mother's mother was from Essex, England, and she somehow got to Hamilton, Ontario, where she married my grandfather, Ross. So there's English on both sides there, my mother's side and my father, naturally.
And your mother and father were who?
My father was James L. Weeks, James Leonard Weeks, and my mother, of course, was Louise Ross Weeks.
Mm-hmm.
She married my father.
And they were married when?
Oh, golly. I don't know, around 1907, in that area.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been a little more earlier than that, but it was about that time.
What caused the family to come to Jamestown, New York?
On my grandfather's side, he was a master mechanic, and he came to Jamestown because of Art Metal. He was a master mechanic in Art Metal, and in Rochester, where they were a number of years in Rochester, he was a very good friend of Thomas Edison. Not Thomas Edison, what the... well, anyway, you know, my mind at my elderly age, I forget. But it was the beginning of the Kodak Company. And he decided to break loose from that association that he had as a master mechanic and come to Jamestown, because apparently Art Metal voted fairly better, but in the long run it would have been better if he stayed with up in Rochester, I guess. But that was how they came to Jamestown. And how my father's side came to Jamestown, I don't know, because they were originally from Massachusetts. So many of the people in this area had come from the New England states. Well, they came from Massachusetts. Actually, in the Old North Church in Boston, in the crypt, which is underneath the main, that's where they buried people. My ancestors are buried there in the Old North Church. I fortunately visited the church at one time and identified the location. Then they went to Attleboro and then across into New York State, the western part, eastern part of New York State. And it seemed to go back this way, westerly, and the family was in Albion for a while. I happened to visit the lodge, the Masonic Lodge in Albion, and in their records it showed that a great, maybe another great uncle, Andrew Jackson Weeks, had been master of the lodge in 1850, which is quite a ways back. And Andrew Jackson Weeks is buried in the Lakeview Cemetery here. I guess he got his name because he was born about the time Andrew Jackson was president. So he latched on to that name, Andrew Jackson Weeks. But then how they then came down to this part of the state, I don't know, but they did live in Ellington for a while, and I think it was at that time my father, James L. Weeks, was born, but he was born in Cherry Creek. Apparently they must have been there with a horse and buggy, and was born while they were in Cherry Creek, but residents of Ellington. And then I suppose the family naturally navigated into Jamestown,
The big city.
the metropolitan area.
Your dad was a lawyer.
He was a lawyer, yes.
Where did you go to law school?
Albany.
Albany.
I think it was 1881. Incidentally, he was a charter member of the law fraternity Phi Delta Phi. He was a charter member there in Albany Law. The chapter of the legal fraternity no longer is there, And fortunately, when I went to Cornell Law School, I was able to join Phi Delta Phi as well, which I thought was very nice because that was where my father had joined.
Were you destined to be a lawyer?
No, I was destined to be a doctor. But I went to Colgate University, and at Colgate, unfortunately, my advisor didn't do anything about advising what I should take or what I should do. That was in the early time when advisors for students was in its embryo stage, I guess. So they didn't know what they were doing anyway. So at the end of my first year, it was found that, gosh, what I had taken was not pre-medical, but just a general smear of courses. So I, at that point, decided, well, I guess I'm going to follow my father's footsteps and become a lawyer. And my father, James L. Weeks, was the senior partner in the firm of Weeks and Ross. And Emmett Ross, my uncle, was the junior partner in Jamestown. So it followed the line that way. And that's why I became a lawyer, by accident. I wanted to be a doctor. I don't know why.
So then you went to Cornell.
At Cornell Law School.
Your undergraduate work was where?
You know, it's a complicated history. Sometimes I'm embarrassed, and sometimes I feel a lot of glee. I spent 2.5 years at Colgate, and then I thought I should be in Washington, D.C., because that's where the action was, and that would be good for pre-law. So at the end of 2.5 years, I moved to George Washington University in the District of Columbia, and that was a very wise move, I think, and I look back on it. George Washington, and in those days it was sort of a pedestrian thing. They had streetcars, no buses, and so I walked a great deal. And my classes were in the morning, and in the afternoon I would go to the Capitol buildings for the Supreme Court sessions and both houses of Congress and some of the commissions were meeting in the afternoon, so it worked out wonderfully. My classes in the morning and going to the government in the afternoon. Incidentally, that's when I went to see Bob Jackson, of course, from Jamestown, and he had been, this was the New Deal period when Roosevelt was holding sway, and Bob Jackson was Commissioner of Internal Revenue. So I and my friend who had come to Washington with me, Alexander Carsilius, Bud Carsilius from Jamestown, both of us went to visit Jackson in his big, luxurious room. It was a huge room, as I recall. And, of course, Jackson was very affable, as he usually was. And it was a very enjoyable interlude. But anyway...
And he would have known you through the relationship with Emmett Ross?
What was that?
Did he would have known who you were through the relationship?
Oh, yes.
Emmett
of course, I had known Bob here in Jamestown because our offices my uncles, which I spent a lot of time in, was in the Hotel Jamestown, and Bob Jackson and his firm, Jackson, Herrick, Turkin, and Leet, was also located in the Hotel Jamestown. So I used to see him quite often while he was in Jamestown, which was a very pleasant thing because I never saw him upset. He was always a sort of a calm personality, and as you know, a terrific attorney.
Mm-hmm. So here you are in George Washington, and how long were you there for?
Well, 2 years, and then I graduated from George Washington Law School. Mm-hmm. That was when the National Cathedral, I don't know whether you've been there or not, but the National Cathedral is just a beautiful structure. But our baccalaureate service in graduation was held in the National Cathedral, which was only constructed as far as the transepts, but the rest of the nave and the superstructure had not been constructed at that time. So that sort of dates me way back. But I graduated in 1939 from law school. 1935, I graduated from undergraduate. So I had four alma maters to contend with, and I didn't realize, but now they're all asking for funds.
They don't forget you.
Instead of just 2, I had 4. But it's well worth it. It was a great experience. As I say, Washington was streetcars, no buses, and we walked. As in those days, we used to walk back and forth to school and our classes, and even to the Capitol, and all the sights of Washington. It was a great place.
So you're there, and this is President Roosevelt's era. This is the era of Charles Evans Hughes as Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
Yes.
Did you ever go into the Supreme Court to see an argument?
Oh, yes, yes. Yes, those were all available to us because they all met in the afternoon. Now, let's see, it was Charles Evans Hughes. I lived for a while, I was several places, but 1717 I Street. That was the last place that I was rooming at. And right across the street was the Supreme Court Justice. It wasn't Charles Evans Hughes, but anyway, a retired Supreme Court Justice lived right across the street from 1717I, and every day his chauffeur with a beautiful, shiny Packard. Packard was a beautiful car in those days. They'd take him for his afternoon ride, which was interesting.
Well, let's see. I think at the time, Oliver Wendell Holmes would have been either on the court or recently retired.
I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Yeah, he's pretty old then.
Yes. It was Oliver Wendell Holmes that lived across the street from us. Now, all that, the buildings that were there, the houses and everything were all destroyed and replaced by government buildings. But I liked the winters in Washington. You got very little snow, but just cold and crisp and blue skies against the white marble buildings. Oh golly, that was a real treat. Nice place to go to school.
I'm going to shut this door here. In the,
Close the door that way.
my golly, that's terrific. Along the way, you meet Sarita Weeks. Sarita Hopkins, I should say. You meet Sarita Hopkins. How does that occur?
How did I meet her?
Yes.
Well, that again is quite a long story.
We're going to start all over. You meeting Sarita Hopkins.
Well, as I mentioned, it is a long story. Not for me, but of course, Sarita was born in Mexico City on December 1, 1913. And her parents had come from Fredonia. And so every summer, and she bewailed this fact, she was sort of a hardship, but anyway, the parents thought she should visit her grandmother, who was located in Fredonia. So they would come up by train. Of course, there's no airplanes in those days. They came up by plane, or by train, to Fredonia. And my aunt, Anna Ross, with whom I lived in Jamestown, was a sister of Clara Sessions. Well, the Sessions were related to Sarita's grandmother as well. So quite often on weekends we would travel from Jamestown to Fredonia to see the family and the grandmother and all that. Well, on this one occasion, Sarita was visiting her grandmother from Mexico. So we were just little tykes, maybe 8, 9 years old, and that's when I first met Sarita. And I'd been in touch with her off and on for no good reason other than the relationship. And when Sarita then, after she was 10 years old, she went to Neuchâtel, Switzerland, where she lived for 7 years. Well, I had corresponded to Sarita in a funny way, and would send her some funny papers, the Katzenjammer Kids and Bringing Up Father, and those old funny paper articles, which she enjoyed receiving. So we kept that relationship until she then went to college at Wellesley, Massachusetts, in Wellesley College, where she was there for 4 years, graduated, and then went on to Yale Drama School. She was there for 4 years. So during that period, we would correspond, and not thinking anything about marriage. That was furthest from my thought, I guess. And well, that was how we met him. And then I was in the Navy as a naval officer for 4 years. And at the end of the war, I was transferred from Espiritu Santo in the South Pacific to the Naval Hospital in the United States because I had some sort of a skin infection, as so many of us did out there at that time. It wasn't anything that was troublesome to me, but the Navy said they'd got to clear it up. Well, when I came back on the transport, landed in San Francisco and through the Golden Gate, and it was really gold in the morning that we came in. It was just beautiful. And then they asked us, well, where do you want to be assigned? Well, most of the fellows want to be assigned as close to home as possible. And I figured, well, golly, you're going to be close to home for the rest of your life. So why do that? And one of the choices was Yosemite National Park, where they had the Ahwahnee Hotel, which was the most beautiful hotel in the park. It was turned over to the Navy as a rehabilitation hospital. So I chose that. So fortunately, I was in Yosemite for a whole month, but the doctors couldn't clear up my skin infection. It didn't bother me. I'd be just as well any place. But so I did horseback riding and hiking, and we went on a fishing trip up into the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was a glorious time, particularly to be in Yosemite, and it was in the fall of the year, so it was just glorious. But anyway, then I went from there. They assigned me to St. Albans Hospital in Jamaica, New York, which is in the metropolitan area. And the day they had me transfer, that skin infection cleared up. But here I was still under orders. When you're under orders, you have to follow them out. So I ended up in the St. Albans Hospital, and on weekends I would go. I had my car, an old DeSoto car, which I'd had on blocks during the war. I had that back and would drive up to Troy, New York, at the Russell Sage College where Sarita was teaching. She was in charge of the French house, where, incidentally, everybody in the French house, everything they said had to be in French. You couldn't intersperse it with English at all. So it was, she was in her glory because, she could be very fluent and could teach it. She'd been to other colleges and taught French and Spanish. But anyway, I went up there and back and forth weekends, and we decided to be married. Well, that was a little difficult to have anything formal. So we decided that...
I want to know, was it a joint decision, something that just happened? How did you propose to her?
Not on bended knees, but next thing to it, I guess. I just thought, well, why don't we get married? And so she called her mother, who was then living in Dunkirk, and everything was fine. Well, and where we were going to get married, it wouldn't be formal because it was, the circumstances weren't proper for that. So we decided to be married at Hamilton, New York, where Colgate University was, where I'd been in college. And the little Episcopal church, the rector there was a member of my fraternity at Colgate, but somewhat older, Sammy Burns. And so we decided on the Christmas vacation, when most of the students were home, that would be the proper time. So we stayed at the Colgate Inn, which was a very nice place to stay, and we got married there and spent most of our honeymoon at Hamilton. So that was how it happened. It's a long story, isn't it?
Terrific story. It's a terrific story.
Well, we lived happily ever after. We never had any real arguments. We saw that each other was able to play out their own part, and she was very supportive in everything that I did. Of course, I eventually got into politics, which was an interesting phase of my life, I guess, because Sid Hughes was the assistant district attorney in Jamestown and a very good friend of ours. He wanted me to run for the school board in Jamestown because he was retiring. He said, "Oh, there'll be a place for you." Well, of course, you have to run for the office. You just can't be placed in an office like that. So I ran and was fortunate to be elected to the school board. And then from the school board, just having returned from the Navy and being young and spunky, I suppose, they wanted me to run for some other office. So you just don't go into those things without going up the ladder. So I then ran for the county supervisor. There were, I think, 6 county supervisors from Jamestown, and I was successful in that, so had a term of office on the county supervisors, which was very interesting. That's when the county home was in DeWittville. Oh, that was a tremendous place. I think around 440 acres of farmland. It was almost self-sufficient. They grew their own vegetables and their beef, cattle, and all that. It was a wonderful experience. And then some politician got under their skin to transfer the county home to Dunkirk. Well, then the old county home at DeWittville went into disrepair. They had barns and all equipment and everything. As I say, almost self-sufficient, which was a wonderful asset for the county, but politics intervened and it was transferred. But anyway, from county supervisor, then Pat Schobeck and Oscar Linné and Russ Rogerson were influential in political circles at that time, and they wanted me to run for mayor. Well, I did, against Sam Stroke, who was the sitting mayor, and I was defeated by 411 votes, I think. So I cooled my heels for another 2 years and then ran again. And see, it was a nonpartisan system of elections. So the second time I ran, I got the endorsement from both the Republican and Democratic parties, which pretty much assured me of success. Well, success came my way, and we were elected. And it was a great experience to be mayor of Jamestown. because my father had been mayor in around 1907 or 19 to 1909, I think. And so...
When was your term?
What was that?
What years were you mayor?
1952 and 53. I didn't run again because I figured if I was going to be a lawyer, I'd have to practice law. If I stayed in the mayor's office, why, all vestige of my legal practice would disappear. So I didn't run a second term, which I guess was the right way to do it. So I went back to practicing law.
What did you learn while you were mayor?
What did I learn?
Yeah. Were there surprises that you weren't aware of?
Of course, I'd been in politics long enough to know that there were not too many surprises. No, I can't say that there were any real surprises. The intricacies of the office now are somewhat different from when I was there. And also, the pay that you get was extremely different from what it is now. Now, it's hard to say because the inflationary trend has made it that way, and we didn't have assistants. I had a secretary, and that was about the extent of assistance that we had. Of course, you're ex officio member of all the boards and commissions. That was somewhat of a surprise because you'd have to make all those meetings as well as your own. And it wasn't an 8-hour day. The 8-hour day is at your office at the city hall. And then it extended, so my day was usually 14, sometimes 16 hours a day because you go to the committee meetings and then you're called upon to give speeches at different organizations and events, which was maybe I could say that's maybe a surprise, the extent of time that you'd have to spend to fulfill your duties. Well, it was good training. Training for what? Well, training for the rest of your life, I guess.
If you had to take a snapshot of what Jamestown was like when you were mayor and what differences are today, not as mayor, but just the city itself, how would you compare and contrast that?
Well, that's hard to say. You know, they used to plow the sidewalks with the horse and plow. Beautifully done, excellently done. And then some person got the wild idea, well, you should do that mechanically. Well, that was a bad decision. It never worked out well. And ever since the change from the plowing to that has proven that it just isn't workable successfully. And we had the old streetcars then. Now we have buses. And the garbage collections, they're all right. A lot different. The Board of Public Utilities was was going nicely, and then we had the city hospital on Jones Hill, and Harry Bergeson was a terrific councilman, excellent. He was in charge of the hospital committee, and he spent an awful lot of time in developing the relationship on the city hospital and all their problems. But the Board of Public Utilities was going great. And
What about the downtown at the time, Stan, 1950s? Describe that. You know, you see pictures of it being very vibrant. It seemed to be quite a hub.
yes, and a lot of the beautiful old homes were there, all of which have been removed for office buildings and different things, which was a change of pace, really. You hated to see the buildings like here, the building we're in now, that remained. But I remember just across the street here, it was not a beautiful building, but that's where old Bert Rappel, Albertus W. Rappel, lived. He was in school at the time I was, but their house was right there. And then it became a gasoline station. That was removed, and the gasoline station was put in there. And the Greyhound bus used to pull in. That was one of the stations for the Greyhound bus. And they had a restaurant in connection with the bus terminal, which was a very prominent place, just across the street here. And now the building we have here is the telephone building, and of course that's not being put to as much use as it was intended, but still an attractive place. And then all along Fifth Street were these homes, and then there was the Maltby home, the Broadhead homes, and the Stuart Abbott property just on the other side of Spring Street. Oh golly, and Dr. Goodwin's house was just on the other side, just down the hill a bit. All those are gone. And those were the days that you took pride in the city. Well, we took pride in it then, and we took pride in it now. But there was an older atmosphere, which was much to its favor. And the streetcars and the plowing of the streets. We didn't have as much equipment at that time for plowing the streets, and the sanding and the cinders that they used to put on the streets and the hills that required it. But it's hard to say. It was a more comfortable city, I think, that we enjoyed. More provincial, maybe you put it that way.
You mentioned earlier that Sarita supported you in your activities, and you supported her and her activities. What were her activities?
Oh golly, she was into everything, and she was quite a public speaker. They called on her constantly to give a speech to this organization, that organization, and she was always ready and willing to do it. She was a very delightful, intelligent lady, and could remember her experiences. And gosh, she had a speech on hats, ladies' hats, which was a winner. And certain dresses that she would speak about. She was always into costumes. She liked costumes. When she was a youngster, why, she was constantly wearing different costumes, whether it's Dutch or Spanish, and she did Spanish dancing, and even here she did Spanish dancing for some groups that wanted it. And she was good for putting on all those things, and she didn't charge anything for herself for these speeches, but then she got to the point where she figured, well, something has to be charged, otherwise it'll just be inundating her for giving speeches. So she would require, say, $15 or $20, but it would be by check payable to the James Prendergast Library, particularly the Children's Division. So that's where those funds went, would be to the library. And she was a good cook. She made our bread, whole wheat bread, for years and years. She had a special recipe, and so she'd do that. And she'd do a lot of home cooking, not out of the can. We'd get dry beans, and she'd soak them overnight and make them into some delicious meal later on, simple meal. We didn't eat the fancy ones. She was adept at doing all these things. I guess she learned a lot of it in Mexico when she had the Mexican maids would make up their concoctions, and she followed suit on that. And she'd make, when we'd have roast beef, the roast beef and popovers. Let's see, the popovers were, what do you call them? Yorkshire pudding. And she made, big puffy ones. They were a delight to eat and a delight to see even. But she was very ingenious, and then she made costumes. Somebody wanted costumes, so she'd make costumes along with her Mexican nanny. Her Mexican nanny came with her all the way from Mexico to Neuchâtel, Switzerland, was there with her, and then came back to this country. And when she went to college, they wouldn't permit her to have her nanny at Wellesley, so she went with her mother in Dunkirk. And then when she came to Jamestown as a married lady, Nanny came with her. So we had Nanny for a number of years, so she assisted in a lot of the housework and a lot of the making of meals, along with Sarita and her expertise. But in making costumes, why, she was very helpful in assisting in making the costumes. For the consistory here, Scottish Rite Masons, why, she made any number of costumes that you find in the robing room now. And then in the York Rite Masons, the York Rite banners that are used in their degree work, she made a number of those. But she kept busy, And then, of course, that doesn't take in her traveling. She was a travel bug, always wanting to travel, which was a fortunate thing. I didn't stand in the way of that, and many of the trips I went with her to Australia, New Zealand, and South America, and Africa, gosh, you name it. I think the first time we went together, it was in 1959. We went to Scotland to see the Highland Games up in Braemar, Scotland, where the Queen and her retinue were present. And that was my introduction to Scotland. And then we went down through England and Wales on the same trip, which was very exciting. But then in 1964, we did a peculiar thing. We flew over to London and Heathrow Airport, and she took a plane from there to Czechoslovakia, and I took a plane up to Edinburgh, Scotland, where I rented a car and traveled all through the Highlands, playing as many golf courses as I could, St Andrews and Turnberry and Troon and gosh, you name it. And that's where I bought my first set of Scottish golf clubs at St Andrews. I had told at the Tom Auchterlonie golf shop, Tom Auchterlonie had been one of the Open champions way, way back, and his son was running the shop and still making clubs, but I told him I wanted the best set of clubs that I could have. So I got a beautiful set of stainless steel. Of course, that was coming into the vogue. A stainless steel set of irons and a great set of persimmon head wood clubs. I still have them, and if I get out to play anymore, I probably will still use them. Of course, that's doubtful. But that was quite a trip, and Sarita went all through Czechoslovakia and some of the namery companies over there, and then we came back. We met at Heathrow and then back home. But that was a delightful time, and then
it was communist Czechoslovakia at the time.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, it was communist, and our first trip to Russia was by bus. We flew from England over to Holland and picked up the bus in Holland, and then the bus took us through Holland and Germany and into Poland, and we stayed at a hotel which had been Paderewski's, the pianist's, home in Warsaw, I think it was. And then we went across the border into Russia, and we had our heart's content on caviar and other Russian food, which was very interesting. And we went various stops in Russia, and then to Moscow, and then northerly to St. Petersburg, then out eventually into Finland. And we had a very nice time in Finland, and I remember, oh, golly, at this hotel in Finland we had jars of fresh milk, and of course I hadn't had fresh milk for the whole time I was in Russia, and then it was just delightful. And the Finnish food was good. The food in Russia was healthful, nourishing, but no flares. And then from Finland, we went across to Sweden, and I think it was Jönköping. Is that the Jönköping? And then down into Denmark, and then home. But that was very good. We had another trip. This one was with Elder Hostel, 3 weeks Elder Hostel. We had a week in Finland, a week in Sweden, and a week in Norway. But the one in Sweden, gosh, that was quite an event, because I had a whole week there in Vadstena, which was a delightful little community, but it's where Gustavus Adolphus had one of his castles, was at Vadstena, and then there was an abbey there connected with a nunnery. Of course, that was in Catholic days. They used it as, and we stayed in the convent there. This was part of the tour. And it's interesting, St. Birgit, or St. Bridget, or Birgit, or something like that, it reminds me of Brigitte Overcash, but this saint was a woman, and the nunnery was named after her. And the buildings are the same. It's well kept up now. And there was the abbey was right next to the nunnery, and we went to church there. It's, of course, Lutheran now, Lutheran service, but the whole reredos and the altar and everything looked just like the Episcopal or Roman Catholic church. And the rector there, who was Lutheran, was dressed in the usual high church robes, and incidentally, in the back were about 6 nuns, all dressed in their regular habits, looked like Roman Catholic nuns, but they were Lutheran nuns, which was very amazing. And the whole church interior was full of icons. It was a delightful time in Vadstena. I went to Rotary meeting there, and they were very gracious, and they had a young Rotaract, I guess, for young people, of teenagers. And the same rector who had the services in the Abbey was also a Rotarian, and he was at the Rotary meeting. But strangely enough, a little later, I went to another meeting. It wasn't a Lions meeting or anything like that, but there he had on a Lions Club emblem. And I asked him, "Are you both a Lion and a Rotarian?" He said, "Yes." But then also, I attended an Oddfellows meeting in Vadstena. They didn't have a Masonic lodge there, so I couldn't attend the Masonic lodge, but I attended the Oddfellows. And they, oh boy, they really had a beautiful temple, stained glass windows, and their ritual was performed so perfectly. And then they had a dinner afterward, which was a very festive table with toasts and everything, very much like you'd find in a British Masonic meeting and dinner. But that Vadstena experience was marvelous.
I'm going to